So next on the chopping block is, of course, AMD. How are they going to compete with both Intel and Nvidia this year? This is actually a gigantic year for AMD, and they know it. They know this is the year they need to execute incredibly well. It's not to say they haven't been executing well before. The Ryzen division has been incredible over the past few years, but this is the year that Ryzen needs to storm the Intel castle, so to speak. You know, they have a lot of momentum behind their stock. Intel will have a chance to catch up within a year or two. This is when they need to strike hard. And it's because AMD really needs to make a lot of money and establish a powerful brand name this year so they can take this money, keep making more money in the following years, and use that to really, really invest in R&D so Intel doesn't leapfrog ahead of them. You know, Jim Keller, the guy who designed Ryzen, the guy who designed Core, and, you know, Sandy Bridge, the guy who, this guy is at Intel now. And AMD knows there's a timer ticking before Intel corrects its wrongs. Even if it's not perfect, they will have a good update coming. They have almost unlimited R&D money, massive supply of engineers and fabs, and they've hired the best engineer once again. So, this is the year they need to raffle stomp Intel. And that's worth mentioning. They don't just need to win, they need to raffle stomp. And I think they will. And I'm not going to show you a chart. I thought about it. You know, I was going to put together some large chart that actually showed more than anyone else has done. But there's really no need to, right? Go watch a Dord's video. Go watch someone else's video. We know what's coming. We know. We're going to get 16 cores on AM4. We're going to get probably 8 cores in larger ultrabooks. That's gonna be awesome. We're gonna get. I think AMD will stop at 48 cores for Threadripper this year, and so they can save it for 64 cores next year. Always making sure Epic's just that little bit better. It's good business. So I think they are going to do very well with their CPUs. Right? So I'm not going to dwell on that too long in this video. What I will say is make sure you understand that AMD is not necessarily showing their full set of hands right away. It is in their best interest to pull some punches. Not a lot of them. They want to clobber Intel. They need to clobber Intel, even at the first release of Ryzen 3000. But they only have so many good yields. So it's in their best interest to probably release the almost best 12 cores, the almost best 16 cores first. Allow time for their last gen 8 cores, then 6 cores to clear inventory. Then release their 6 cores. Then drop those prices to kill i3s. And then once Intel responds, then release their 5 gigahertz 16 cores in Threadripper. This will be a staggered release. They will keep a couple of haymakers back so they can counterpunch when Intel responds. Do not expect AMD to show all of their cards right away. But they will do well. And AMD's Mindshare has never been stronger. Has anyone else noticed this? Before I move on to Navi, I want to show an interesting graph here. So quite literally, this is a chart of AMD versus NVIDIA market share over time. And I've also added some major CPU releases. Not all of them are there, but most. And really, this is a way to discuss AMD's mind share. And that's because, yes, absolutely, the graphics card releases matter. That the series is good matters for AMD's graphics market share. But in my opinion, half of it is just how other CPUs are doing. I mean, how many times have people heard some noobish person say, well, NVIDIA's the Intel of graphics cards, even when this was during Fermi, when their cards were worse than AMD. The perception of AMD CPUs is very, very important to how all of their products sell, especially graphics cards being their main other, component that isn't CPUs. So let me illustrate what I mean. So before Phenom 2 came out, Phenom 1 was actually largely seen as a letdown. Anand said it was the biggest letdown in CPU releases in his lifetime. And that's because AMD had clobbered Intel hard with the Athlon FX series. And Core 2 Duo came out and punched back super hard. And then Phenom 1 came out and it just really wasn't enough. It kept up with Intel enough to stay competitive, but it didn't challenge them enough. Well, Phenom 2, quoting them, a true return to competition. And this is a very underrated series. Phenom 2 really was very good. Better than the Intel counterparts, I think, by a sliver at the time. And they were cheaper. They were awesome. I recommended them a lot. And notice that also happens around when they're taking graphics market share. Now, I understand this is also around when AMD's graphics cards were the best relative to NVIDIA's. I understand. But I could just as easily argue it's because they were taking CPU market share. I could just as easily argue that. And it's about perception. You really, really should watch my Reality Will Catch Up with Intel video comparing Zen 2 to Sandy Bridge to understand where this is coming from. Because a lot of people are going to go, well, then why did AMD's market share not fall apart during Sandy Bridge? And it's because Sandy Bridge was not perceived that great. This is a direct quote. Sandy Bridge doesn't actually move things forward. That is how people saw Sandy Bridge. They did not see it as a big deal. They were wrong. We all know this in hindsight, but that's how they saw it. But then Bulldozer came out, and everyone knew things were bad because it was arguably worse than Phenom 2. I remember recommending a lot of Phenom 2s over Bulldozer chips that were the same price. And then Ivy Bridge came out, and that is when reality caught up with AMD. And it's a means to the next chapter in the evolution of the PC. Ivy Bridge was very highly regarded, only 5-10% better than Sandy Bridge, but it used so much less energy and had better features. And then people looked over and they said, oh, wow, AMD is so far behind. And this is right when their market share started plummeting. And notice something, right here, it started to plummet during the 7000 series, which was better than their 6000 series. It was better. The 6000 series was excellent. I think better than Fermi still. But the 7970 used about the same amount of energy as a 6970, maybe 10% more, while being like 80% more performance. I mean, that is a huge uplift. And NVIDIA was blown away. The GTX 580 was just worse. And yet you would think against Kepler, they should at least keep the same market share or something. But no, it went way down, way down. And then Piledriver came out, and it, and there's ups and downs around here. Like you see, this goes up, but don't pay attention to the noise. Their market share went down over the next 3 years, and their graphics cards weren't really worse until Maxwell came out here. And there's no reason for this trend to have started so early, except that their CPU's perception plays so much into how people see AMD as a company and how they see all of their products. And that means if AMD CPUs are seen as subpar, a lot of people are going to dismiss their graphics cards unfairly. And that's just the reality of the situation. The last thing I'll say about this chart is don't pay too much attention to here, and note that I cut off a lot of this because the mining boom of 2016 and 2017 really just messes with this. But the point I'm trying to illustrate is there's no reason the decline should have started here. It's because AMD CPU's perception plays into their graphics cards. With Ryzen being out for a couple of years, the mindshare of AMD has never been stronger. Their drivers are better than ever. Barring a few blunders, they still do. And their CPUs right now are perceived slightly better than Intel in enthusiast circles. And so AMD has a unique chance here to really capitalize on this growth in mindshare. You guys can feel it too, right? AMD 2 years ago was just like, oh, there's, AM dead, AM dumbs, all of the memes. And now there's just a groundswell of positive energy regarding AMD. And I believe AMD knows this, and they're going to try to capitalize it as hard as they can with Navi. I know it's been delayed, but that's probably for the better. Better that Ryzen 3000 comes out, blows Intel away, gains even more momentum for AMD, and then they punch back hard with Navi as well, when AMD's mindshare has never been at its highest. That's the title of this video. AMD finally has the mindshare to take graphics card market share. And that's why I think Navi is going to sell very well, unless it's just, some kind of bulldozer level letdown, which I hope not, right? But I believe at the very least the rumors we've received are accurate in painting a picture of Navi at least being much better than Vega and Polaris. Maybe not as good as like the 7000, 5000, or 4000 series, but very good, and I don't believe it needs to be. I don't believe it needs to be as good as the 4870 was for them to take just as much market share, or should I say, a lot of maybe not as much market share as the 4870, but a lot of market share. I think people will be surprised how much market share AMD is able to take when they have a good lineup. After all, Vega has sold 10 times better than the Fury. It is not 10 times better than what the Fury was at the time, I can assure you that. But how will AMD's Navi lineup look? Well, I put some thought into it. Let's take a look at that. All right, so let's talk about the Navi lineup here. Now, right off the bat, a few things. Number one, it is rumored that there might be I/O dies for the graphics cards. They haven't found a way to go full chiplet Infinity Fabric with their graphics cards yet. But they realize that, oh, well, we could still make I/O dies that connect with the graphics core and save us a ton of money. So there's a chance that these might use I/O dies in a way where they'll have like a 512-bit 14 nanometer I/O die, and then they will cut that down into 384, 256 as necessary, and that would allow them to do something like take this crazy flagship meant to use 512-bit, and they wouldn't do this, but they could give it a 256-bit bus and save on memory, or more likely, they might make some wonky graphics cards where they take something with a tiny core count and give it a shit ton of bandwidth for like rendering or video processing or something. I'm not 100% sure that's going to happen with these. I think there's a decent chance it will happen at least with the second generation of Navi, but that could be true. So keep that in mind, and that would mess with these die sizes. Basically, I'm assuming somewhat monolithic dies with the chance that some of these could use an I/O die too. All right. And number two, where do these numbers come from? Well, there's a lot of knowns we have with Navi. I'm basically just filling in the gaps. I treated this like a multi-system equation. What are our knowns? Well, we know the 3060 is supposed to be around a 580. We know the 3070 is around, I think it means a little weaker, than a Vega 56. We know the 3080 is cut down of Navi 10 and around Vega 64 plus 15%. Maybe a little more. I think probably a little more, actually. That's what we know. We also know some direct comments from AMD people when it comes to die sizes. They said the 3070 or Navi 12 is smaller than Polaris, and that it should be just below 200 millimeters squared. Oh, well, what I put together comes out to about 197. They also said that they want their Polaris replacement to be a bigger die than Polaris was, that they wish they would have made Polaris like 20-30% bigger because it could have yielded a lot more performance per die space. So that's what I'm assuming here. Full Navi 10, 295. Not quite as big as like, your 1070s or something, but bigger than Polaris. And I'm also kind of assuming that their flagship will be just a tad bigger overall than Radeon 7. Okay, that's what we know. And so you basically just make several algebra equations. You assume IPC. I assume a 20% IPC increase. I think that's very consistent with the rumors we've heard. Obviously, it could be a little more, a little less. But this is kind of the middle of the road. We'll call this the slightly optimistic outcome. And if I know that, then I can put in die sizes on one side of and some of the equations. I can put in performance levels on part of the equation. I can put the known GDR6 speeds for sale. I can then use that to pipe out bandwidth and play into overall performance. And I take all of this and I just start solving for the unknowns. It's just a multi-system algebra equation. And so let's see what most likely Navi will look like. Starting from the bottom, actually, not the top. The 3060. This is the card I'm most excited about, and here's why. Around a 580, I think it will beat the 580. This is, again, my opinion, my conjecture. My gut tells me it's going to overperform the rumors a little bit. What does that mean? That means RX 590-ish performance in a sub $150 graphics card and a graphics card below 75 watts. That means entry-level gaming can do 1440p. All right. It can do 1080p, 144 hertz gaming. Entry-level at that performance level is a much bigger deal, in my opinion, than just making 4K gaming a little cheaper. That means the bar is way higher, and that will have the biggest changes on how good graphics are. And that is also going to be so cool because the higher bend versions of this bend for better voltage leakage for laptops will be using this chip. You know, this is their RX 560 replacement. This is what you're going to find in those $800 Lenovo mid-range gaming laptops everyone loves. And you'll be able to game like 1440p Ultra. That is going to be incredible. I'm very excited about that. And the way they're going to do this by having it also on Navi 12, because that's the rumor, both 3070 around Vega 56 and then RX 580, a very big performance gulf. The reason these are both Navi 12 is the 3060 is way cut down from the 3070, way cut down. And that's how they're going to afford to make this on 7 nanometer. What they'll do, and the 1 gigabit per second super slow GDR6 being made right now comes in smaller sizes, which will allow them to make it a 4 gigabyte card and save some money, is they're just going to disable like 40% of the die, clock it lower, basically all of their imperfect 3070 yields. And it's already a small die size, so they can make these with, you know, a decent amount of them being good yields. You know, so that like, you know, like 80% that are imperfect, they're just going to put them all into a 3060. And then some of those that clock a little higher with less energy, they'll probably put into laptops. That's how they'll make the 3060 also on Navi 12. And then let's move on to the 3070. I believe it'll be around a Vega 56. This is going to be your 1660 and 1660 Ti killer. It will beat the 1660 Ti slightly while using probably about the same energy but costing less. It will be an impressive card. Again, this is your 1440p Ultra 1080p 144 hertz card for under 200 bucks. It's going to be awesome. Now let's move up to the 3080. And the way I believe they will bring a die size for a reasonable price that's larger is, and keep in mind, the full die is this. I'm showing, if you cut it down, what the equivalent die size would be. So really these bold numbers here are the actual die size of everything within the same die. It's just, I think it's unfair when we say the 1070 has the same die size as the 1080. No, it doesn't. It's cut down. What does it really have if it was its own die? And the 3080 will be highly cut down, highly cut down from Navi 10. It could be even smaller than this. It might even be 3072 SPs. I'm not entirely sure. But I believe it will be several dies cut down, and they will not launch the full Navi 10 on desktop this year. I don't think they will. I think they're just going to launch cut down dies, and they're going to save some of their better dies for both professional customers and also the PS5. The PS5 is rumored to also use Navi 10. And, or maybe it's the Xbox, you know. I'm sure Sony and Microsoft are both looking at a lot of options, but I do think the PS5 will be around here, and we know the PS5 is targeting around 1080 Ti performance. Before you scoff at that level of performance in a console, keep in mind they're rumored to sell for $500, and it's coming out a year and a half from now. A year and a half from now, 1080 Ti performance isn't that crazy, so please work with me, people. And so I believe they will be saving the slightly cut down yields for the PS5. They will take their more cut down yields, sell it on desktop early. And yeah, I think you're getting about 2080 performance. Just shy of 1080 Ti performance, like 10% weaker than 1080 Ti, in between 1080 and 1080 Ti performance for $280. This is like entry 4K gaming brought to below $300. And an efficient package as well. I think this will be awesome, just for the fact that you can now be a 4K gamer for under 300 bucks. And I believe eventually they'll probably release a larger Navi 10 on desktop. What you got to think about is AMD tends to design an architecture and then do a refresh. Think of the RX 580 versus the 480. I bet AMD wishes, even if they only use 2304 stream processors for the 480, even if they made a bigger die, They could have cut it down and just sold the same RX 480, but then waited for yields to improve and then released the uncut 2560 SP die. They could have done that. And I think that's the frame of mind AMD is going to have here. So when you see these massively cut down early launches for Navi 9 and Navi 10, keep in mind that's because what they're doing is they're preparing to have a refresh with less of the SPs disabled when yields improve. They're planning ahead now. AMD's smarter. You know, the RX 4060 will be barely cut down from the 3070, and the 3070 will be way overclocked above this, probably up to the actual target clocks of about 1.8 gigahertz. And that's the same with Navi 10. Yes, they're launching with something that's cut down from the top, but eventually they'll probably make an RX 4080, and they'll want to be able to use the full 3840 SPs. And so that's what you need to think about with Navi 9 as well. Navi 9, and I call it this, it might be called something else, people, please. But we've seen Navi 9 show up in rumors, so that's the name I'm going with for now. And these names, I don't know. Maybe they'll only release one of these, and they'll call it the 3090, and then they'll do a full refresh where they use more of them. I don't know. So these are just placeholder names. Obviously, I don't know what it's going to be, and I don't know the final prices as well. But I do believe there's a very good chance they will paper launch a larger Navi at the end of the year, similar to what they did with the 7970, and it will be targeted to be as good or better than the 2080 Ti. And I do believe they will go above 4096. We have heard rumors that there was an 88CU graphics card being made. A lot of people assumed it was Vega 20. But I think that that rumor was misplaced. I think they are making an 88CU graphics card, and it's Navi 9, and no one's connected the dots yet. So that's my conjecture here. Navi 9, I think it will be 88 compute units. I believe so that's 5,632 cores. I think they will go up to 512 bits. I think it will have 16 gigabytes of RAM, and that will give you an insane amount of bandwidth, and they will just go up to the full 300 watts, I think, eventually, too. But I don't know that this full version is coming out this year. I think it's more likely they will release a cut-down 3084-bit 12-gigabyte card with around 4 to 5,000 SPs that's meant to compete with the 2080 Ti, and that they will save for better yields to do a relaunch in the RX 4000 series. So final remarks on this chart. Hopefully you've had enough time to look over it. I'm sure we'll be discussing it in the comments below. I believe they will go bigger than Radeon 7. And I do believe a version of Navi 9 may go into the next Xbox or PS4. Navi 10, Navi 9, there's going to be a lot of deliberation over at Sony and Microsoft over what to use in the console. And I believe if Sony launches first with something around a 1080 Ti, Microsoft will launch a heavily cut down card that's probably 30% stronger and is a very highly cut down Navi 9 to compete with Sony's almost full die Navi 10. So a lot of this around here is conjecture. I don't think they'll release all of it right away, and I think some of these are going to be for consoles. But this is how I think the lineup is more or less going to shake out. All right, so final thoughts here. Again, these are estimates. A lot can change, but I'm trying to give you guys an early look at how AMD will take on Turing-based cards this year, based on information that we know now. Undoubtedly, we will learn new information, like how much of it is true that there are I/O dies involved, how, more specifics to core count, and I will release new videos, I'm sure halfway through the year, of final estimates of what I think Navi will be. But here you are, 6 months before it comes out, and I am trying to give you guys a good idea of what to expect. Maybe you're wondering if you should wait to upgrade, and the truth is I do think they will challenge the 2070 effectively, and there's a chance they could challenge the 2080 this year with a much more efficient card. A chance. And if that sounds tempting to you and you're happy with your gaming performance, go ahead and wait. And if you're not using Radeon 7 for mining, or you're not some crazy overclocker, like if I get Radeon 7, it's because it dropped in price by $100, and I just like overclocking, and it looks like a card I know I could overclock well. But it will be pushed out of the way, I think, by the end of this year. And I do think there's a very good chance there could be a paper launch of large Navi this year if AMD has the capability, but don't expect that necessarily. Now, these estimates could be a little higher. They could be higher. Perhaps they'll challenge the 2080, but I doubt it. I think my outlook is the slightly optimistic outlook. I don't think it's going to get much better than this. And they could definitely be lower. Like, let's say it's 10% lower. Let's say instead of being in between a 2070 and a 2080, the RX 3080 is a hair above the 2070 or just trades, blows, and loses a little bit. Well, then the price will be lower. Instead of 280, it'll probably be 240. You know, something like that. But it could be a little higher. It could be a little lower. And another thing is, this isn't crazy. I know there's a lot of people who will go, I'm smoking something if I think it's going to be this good. Guys, half a year from now, really? A whole year? Over a year, actually, of Turing dominating the graphics card market. This will seem like the bare minimum AMD should accomplish to do well. So trust me, this is not crazy at all. And the last thing I'll say is that NVIDIA will have options to combat this, and I would not be surprised if at the very end of this year they're ready with the new 12 nanometer lineup. And that will, of course, be in the next NVIDIA 2019 video where I go over what I think that is. It could be pretty funny, actually, what it ends up being. But we'll get to that in another video. So final closing thoughts on AMD. AMD needs to make bank this year. They have the Mindshare. They have a chance to stick it to Intel and to a lesser extent NVIDIA, and they need to make that R&D money so they can reinvest, make Arcturus for graphics cards way better in a couple years, and continue to innovate with Zen. They need to, and they know it. And they will be pulling some punches at first. Not most. They want to clobber the competition, but because of how the yields are going with a new process, they're incentivized to not release everything until they need to. So whenever you see a launch and you go, oh, well, Intel or NVIDIA will just do this, don't be surprised if AMD is also pulling a punch to punch back as well. Okay, so yeah, this video took a lot of effort. To be honest, this is my second attempt making it. Earlier today, I filmed this on the 4th. Again, I just completely deleted the work I did on Sunday because I just didn't think it was up to my quality standards. And the standards I think you guys are starting to expect from someone like me, and I hope you've noticed the increase in quality. I do have a Patreon now. Please support me. The more supporters I get around this week tells me you guys want me to do more analysis videos and less drunken ranting videos. If you like this, please support me there. And please, you know, if you don't need to support me. I'm just some schmuck who's doing this instead of trolling on WCCF. You know, if you want to just share, subscribe, tell your friends about me, maybe one of them will decide to support me. Please do that as well. It really means a lot. All right. Thank you.